Hey folks, this is Cindy. Thanks so much for stopping by. As promised, I am back with the full version of the three-part series that I shared with you last week. Now, I'll warn you, this is really long. It's about 45 minutes. If you don't want to sit through that, you can still watch each one of these separately. A while back, I had made a card for a W+9 guest design post. That would be the card here on the bottom. That was actually inspired by the one on the top. Now, I wanted to show you that you don't need 4 inches by 9 inches of real estate in order to make a really fabulous scene. I personally prefer a card that large because I like to have all that space to work with, but you don't have to do that. In fact, you can make these cards even more simple yet. You don't have to add in all of the stuff that I did. I just wanted to show you that it is easy and it is possible. They're not at all hard, they're just time consuming. Think of these cards as a journey, not a destination. Now, if you need a birthday card stat, this would not be your go-to, because these style of cards are all about enjoying the process of card making. These are the types of cards that you take your time and you build them up. So when you're done with them, you have something that really makes a statement. We're also going to be using images that you wouldn't normally think to use together, but we're going to take advantage of the perspective. So elephants are normally large animals, but you put them next to a jar or a cupcake like this, and they look smaller. So this guy, I literally threw this card together in about 5 minutes. I stamped the elephant with the flowers and the caterpillar and those little butterflies, and look at him. He looks like as large as an elephant should look. Now, I did this card a couple years ago. Actually, this is the bear from Happy Mail, which is this stamp set right here. And I wanted to show you guys that not only could you use this stamp set for this particular scene, but it's all about perspective. This is Party Animal by W+9, and it would work just as well. Okay, so all of our stamps that we're going to be using today are from W+9. This one is a Pocketful Valentine. This one is fresh preserves. We're going to use that jar, and I'm going to show you how I get rid of that solid lid and make my own. And then we have our little elephants here. This is Unforgettable. This has got to be my favorite set ever from W+9. It is so adorable. This is Sweets and Treats. I was blown away when I saw this stamp set. I can think of so many different things you can do with it. You could even take just one of those cupcakes and a stand and do a really clean and simple card, maybe put a sentiment on the front, and you would be good to go in no time. Okay, so on to my favorite subject. I love masking, and these 3M full stick post-it notes are a huge time saver. You stamp one image on top, you pull off as many sheets as you need, and you cut them all out at once, and you're done. The other alternative, a good alternative, would be the Inkadinkadoo stamping mask paper. The only drawback to this is you would have to stamp it as many times as you need it and cut them out individually. So as you can see here, I have them all cut out, even my little itty bitties, because I really believe it's the details that make a scene. And once I have them all cut out, I put them on a scrap of cardstock, and then I have them all together. I don't lose them, and they don't get ruined, and it's really handy. The other thing I like to do is cut down a piece of copy paper to the size of my card panel, and I make myself a plan. Now, I did try to clean this up for you guys so you could have a better idea of what I was getting at here. So I did do some masking, others I didn't, but this is my plan, and because I like it, I'm actually going to follow that today. I'm going to line up my stamp on top of my plan, and then I'm going to stamp it just like that. So I don't have to eyeball anything. It takes out the guesswork. I know exactly where I want everything, and it makes things go so much faster. Now, I don't normally do this, but for the purpose of this video, I made another copy of my plan and I colored it in. Now, this is in rainbow order, so pink, red, orange, yellow, so on and so forth. And when I say that everything in your foreground gets stamped first and then you work your way to the back, this is exactly what I'm talking about. So I stamped everything in pink first and then red, etc., etc. Now, I'll be honest, I used a Misty stamping tool, so that really helps a bunch, but you can totally do this with acrylic blocks. You don't need to have a stamp positioning tool to do it. It'll still work. It'll just take a little bit longer. And I also have a line drawn there at the bottom, and I did that on purpose because I wanted you to see that I need that. So when I'm done stamping all of my images, I make sure that I have enough space to ground all of them. Otherwise, they're just going to look like they're floating out there in nowhere. And like you can see on the one on the top, it looks like almost like they're sitting on the counter. And that's what I was going for. I wanted this little party scene to look like maybe they were all partying like it was 1999 at a birthday party or whatever. I let my imagination go. Regardless, I needed to make sure that I had enough room to ground them. The most time-consuming thing when making cards like this is honestly cutting out the mask. Now, the 3M full stick Post-it notes make a huge difference. And it seems crazy to cut out these itty-bitty cherries, but I promise it's worth it. You'll be glad you did. Now, this is another card I hope to share with y'all soon. It's the same principle, just a different approach. The other card we've stamped across the panel. This one is from the center, working our way to the edges of the panel. You start with the pink peony, then you stamp the red anemones, the orange petunias, so on and so forth until you have all of your images done. Again, with a stamping tool, you can do more than one stamp at a time, and it goes that much faster, but it's still doable with an acrylic block. And don't be afraid to come up with a plan before you actually start your card. Copy paper is inexpensive. You've spent good money on your stamps. Use them to your advantage and use them until you're comfortable with them. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, here's both of these plans side by side. You can see that they're both exactly the same principle, just different approaches. And my youngest daughter suggested that I make these look all spiffy for you folks. So that's what the color keys and the black cardstock is for. Here is the finished card with the anemones, peonies, and petunias. And is anybody else thinking Pioneer Woman? I don't know. Anyway, the other thing I would like to show you is when I make a card, I like to take all of my stamps out of the packaging and put them on an acrylic block. That way they're handy, they don't get lost, I don't have to struggle with any packaging, and it really helps keep me on track. And then also, because I'm OCD like that, I will take another block, and as I stamp out my card, as soon as I'm done with each image, I will put it on the other block and get them out of my way. And it really helps keep me organized, and then I don't feel as though I am struggling as much to build this large scene. I have my Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock cut down to 4 inches by 9 inches. Again, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 would be just fine, or 5 by 5, any shape we would like would be just fine. I'm taking my T ruler, and there is an exact science here for me, folks. I realized a while back that on the centimeter side of my T ruler, where the numbers stick up, that's almost perfect. And I use this frequently for borders and also for what I'm going to do here now, which is to draw that line so I can ground all of my images as I finish up my card. So I'm placing my ruler onto my card panel, and I'm going to line those numbers up right there at the bottom. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect for this particular scene. You wouldn't notice it if it was slightly crooked. So I'm just kind of eyeballing it. Those numbers are big enough that it sure helps a bunch to get it lined up, but it's not a big deal if you don't. Now I'm making sure to keep that pencil line fairly light because I want to be able to erase this later as I finish up my card. I'm using the Memory Misty. In fact, when I decided to make this card, I intentionally made it 4 inches by 9 inches because I knew I had the Memory Misty, and I knew I could fit my panel into a stamp positioning tool this big. If you don't have one, just make sure that your card panel is large, or is as small, as whatever your stamp positioning tool is. It's not a big deal. So now what I'm doing is I've put both my card panel and my plan inside my MISTI, and I have the plan on top because I'm going to use that to line up my stamps. Now, as you can see here, we're starting with the pink layer because those are our foreground images. And I'm going to lay my stamps on top, make sure they're lined up as they possibly can be. You would normally need to put your head right over the top of it to make sure they're lined up perfectly. I suppose it doesn't really need to be. It's not a big deal if there's a little bit, if they're not exactly like the plan. There's a little bit of wiggle room here. And also, I didn't want my head in the way as I was trying to videotape this. As it was, my head kept knocking my camera stand. So I'm just placing them on there. I decided to work from left to right on my card panel as I stamp this. You could choose any side you want. You could start in the middle if you would like. That would be fine. Since I'm going to be Copic coloring, I'm using Hero Arts Intense Black ink. This is one of my favorite Copic friendly inks. And as you can see, I have 4 images stamped at once. It makes things go so much faster, but again, it's fine. If you don't have a stamping tool, use an acrylic block and just work your way across. The other thing I make sure to do is to place all my masks at once. This way I don't forget anything. And then I move on to my second layer. Now we're looking at everything in red. And this will also go fairly quickly because we have different styles of cupcakes, which means different stamps. And we can stamp those all at the same time, just like this. So I have them all laid out on my plan. Make sure you pull your plan out of there before you stamp your card panel. Otherwise, you're not getting anywhere. And then ink up your stamps and then stamp it. If you need to stamp it several times, that's the beautiful thing about a stamping tool, is you can stamp over it again and then your card panel doesn't get ruined because you didn't get it lined up perfectly. And as you can see on some of these images, they're not perfect. Now, me personally, sometimes I'll leave that. I won't worry about it because I'll just outline them again later as I finish things up. Sometimes I'll stamp it again. Now we're moving on to the orange. So we're working our way towards the background. And again, it's the same principle. You line up your stamps, you ink them up, and you stamp them. I also wanted to point out, you see where those little orange slices are tucked back behind that elephant? I like to do that on cards because it's unexpected. Then things don't look so flat. It's the little details, again, that get tucked in there that make a huge impact on your final card. When I started editing this video, I seriously considered only showing you how I stamped a couple of layers, and then I thought that I would edit the rest out and call it a day. However, I know that some of you are just like I am, and visual is better, so I decided to leave it all in. For those of you that are absolutely bored to tears, I don't blame you. You're welcome to fast forward until almost the end. It's okay. We're actually not that far off from being done with our stamping. The next thing I want to show you is how I stamped out that jar. Now, I didn't do anything special, and unfortunately, I did lose the footage on exactly how I did it, so hopefully I can explain it well enough that you can do the same thing that I did. Now, you can see that the top of the jar is solid, and I don't want that. I want a clear threaded top on my jar. So I just inked it up to the edges of the jar. As you see here, there's no top on it. I just made sure I was really careful as I inked that up. And then I took some of my scraps of my Post-it labeling tape and I made sure everything was blocked off around it. And I'm using the hearts from a Pocketful Valentine because I want to make it look like there's little heart candies inside of this jar. Now, my masking isn't perfect. Some of those hearts actually do go outside of the jar, but I'm not going to worry about it. I know that I can cover that up later, and nobody's going to notice the difference. One of the beautiful things about making card scenes like this is that there is so much going on that it doesn't necessarily look busy, but the eye can't necessarily take in all of the details. So if you have minor mistakes, don't beat yourself up, just keep going. You can either cover it up later, fix it later, or just don't even worry about it. Nobody's going to even notice. They're just going to be amazed that you have elephants chilling with candies and lollipops and cupcakes. So just keep going, folks. Now I'm stamping these one last time on this side of the jar because I want to make this guy look like it's really full of candy. And then I'm going to show you how I made a lid for the top of it. I put my mask back on there, and I'm taking a Copic multi-liner and I'm just tracing around the edge of the mask. And then when I pull that off, I add in some threads, and those are basically just straight lines that run across the top of the where the lid would be, so it looks like you could put a lid on it, so it looks threaded. But I will talk about that more here in a little bit, and I'll show you exactly how I did that. I'm just getting the last of my images stamped on there. One thing to note is that I do take the Copic multi-liner and I extend those sticks on those lollipops later on. Okay, now that I have all of my images stamped, it would be a really good time to have a plan on what I would like to do with my background. This way I don't have to take off all of those masks and then place them back on again later. However, I didn't have an idea, so I'm going to take them all off and then I'm going to move on to my Copic coloring. Now, I understand that coloring is so personal to everybody. I know a lot of folks have their favorites that they use all the time, and I do too. However, I think that occasionally it's really great to step out of the side of the box and use colors that you normally wouldn't use. In this next portion of the video, we're going to focus on not just coloring our card panel in, but how I choose colors and some of my favorite tools for that. So the first thing I'm going to do is just take a moment and take in the entire scene. Just give my brain a moment to process all of those images before I decide on any colors. With this scene that I'm working with, I have elephants on here, and that is the first thing that my eye is drawn to when I look at it. So I know that I want them to be gray, and you're welcome to color in your elephants any color you would like. If you would like them pink with purple polka dots, then do that. I want gray, and gray is a wonderful neutral color, so I could pair any color I would like with it. However, the second thing I'm taking into consideration with this is I have those little cherries, and then I have those fruit slices. Now, those could be oranges, those could be lemons and oranges. I've done both on both of the samples that I've shown you at the beginning of the video. But on this one, when I initially looked at it, I instantly thought of oranges. So I have red and orange and gray, and I would like to incorporate all those colors with something a little extra. Now, this is my Pinterest feed. This board is titled Love Me Some Color. That one you saw up there in the top left, that is going to be what I use as my inspiration. But I strongly suggest that if you use Pinterest, that you also have a board where you pin lots of different color samples. It's an excellent starting point. It's a good resource to have when you just don't know what you want to do. And I'm a maniac. I probably have thousands of these things on here. And you don't need to be as crazy as I am about it, but just it's something to keep in mind, and it's something that you'll find handy if you use it. Now, the other thing that I suggest that you have in your stash, and I've got to be honest, folks, I have had this since I was in college, which was like 2002. So it's in rough shape, but I love this tool. This is my color wheel, and I use it all the time. Sometimes I can't always remember off the top of my head what colors would go well with each other. So I just grab this handy little thing and I take a peek at it, and usually I'm good to go. It's totally worth the investment. I will have links for this down below. Now, I don't know if they still make this particular one, but there's tons of them out on the market, including a really large one that I think you can get for Amazon. I think the last time I looked, it was $8, which sounds like a lot of money, but these are worth every penny. So these are the colors I'm going to use on my card today. And yes, I stamped them all out and I swatched them. However, I had a gaggle of giggling girls in my craft room, and all work comes to a halt when those girls come in because I can't focus. So I thought while I was listening to their shenanigans, I would swatch this out. But this will give you a good idea of what I'm going for and how these colors work together. Okay, so now it is time to start coloring in our card panel. And I'm going to be honest, folks, this video is not at all geared towards technique. There is so much going on this panel that we really don't need to concern ourselves with the technique. We just need to simply get it colored in. So I'm actually going to start with the cherries. There's no rhyme or reason as to why I start with a particular image. I just decided that I wanted to start coloring in those little cherries. So I'm going to use red, and these are my go-to reds. I use these all the time. I think they are a perfect classic red. Now I am going to use an R59 for my deepest shadow color, and it's dark, folks. It is really dark. If you're not comfortable with that, an R29 or an R27 would be a really good alternative. But I really wanted to give these a little bit of punch. I want them to stand out a little bit because they're itty bitty and they make a huge impact on this scene. I hope I didn't have that going too fast for you. I basically just drew a C shape on each one, going from lightest to darkest, then darkest back out to lightest, making sure to blend in everything with my lightest color, and then I called it a day. Now I'm going to color in that little ribbon that is on that stand, and I'm also going to color this red. I want to show you that making sure that I keep my shadows where the ribbon threads in and out of the stand. And again, it's not a special technique. I'm basically just drawing light lines with my darkest color and then blending it back out to my lightest. It's a small area, so I need to keep that in mind. Otherwise, I'm going to have red everywhere, and we don't want that. Red is the hardest to fix. Now, I thought I was recording. I was not. So I had already colored in this cupcake in my blue greens, and I am going to show you another one. There is another way that you can color these, and it actually makes it look like there's more detail to the cupcake wrapper, but I'm not going to do that. For me personally, I really struggled with it, so I'm going to show you an easier way to do it. It still gives those cupcake wrappers some depth and dimension, but you don't have to kill yourself doing it, and it definitely does not take anyone out of their comfort zone. So looking at the cupcakes, we really want to play out the roundness of the cupcake itself. And so by doing that, we're going to just lay down a light layer of our lightest color, and then we'll go in with our darkest and work our way out to our lightest. We want the darkest starting at the bottom and working their ways up the sides. And then again, we move back out to our lightest color. There's nothing special here. The only thing I would like to note is I already have an idea of where I'm going to place all of my colors on my card panel already. Because I have so many of them, I want to make sure that I really spread them out across my card, at least use them 2 or 3 times so everything looks more cohesive. So here I am going in with my darkest color and working my way out to my lightest, and that's it. It's as easy as that and nothing special. Okay, so for the wrappers that have the polka dots in them, I want those dots to be white. And then I also want the wrappers with the cupcakes that have the daisies on them, I want those to be white as well. So we simply just need to color in the shadow, and we're going to do that with the cool grays. And I'm just going around the edges, and then that plain wrapper I'm coloring in the same exact way as I did the others, again just with the cool grays. Now I'm going to take in my blue greens, and I'm trying to be somewhat mindful of those dots because I don't want those blue green, but I'm leaving a larger highlight in the center than what I did on the plain wrappers. So I'm going to start working on the elephants, and I'm just going to show you one because they're essentially all colored in the same. And I'm just mapping out my shadows with my lightest color, and that is my C0. And I'm going to be pretty conservative on how dark I make these elephants. We already have some really dark, bold colors going on in our card panel already, so we need to keep that in mind. If we make our elephants too dark, they're just going to blend in with everything else, and then that really defeats the purpose of having elephants in the scene, and these guys are part of the show. So I'm just basically using the tip of my marker to map out where my shadows are going to go, and then I work from lightest to darkest, back out darkest to lightest, and I'm only making those lines just a tiny bit thicker each time I go over it, and then I'm going to finish that out with my C0, and I'm going to call it a day. There, at this point, you can still see some depth and dimension to our guys, but they're not too dark. And then I used my R20 and my R22 to color in their ears, and we're going to leave those at that because those don't need to be anything special either. So the flowers, you can color these flowers in any color you want, but I'm going to focus on some more white because, again, we already have dark, bold colors working on our panel here. So we were going to use that white to our advantage and help these guys stand out a little bit more on their own. Plus, I really liked the idea of making these look like more like a daisy, because that yellow will show up here and there on our card panel, and it will really blend in well with the other colors that we have going on. And coloring in the white on the icing in the flowers is the same principle as any other time. You're just simply coloring in the shadows. Just be sure that you actually leave some legitimate white on your image so it will look white after everything else is colored in. Now I'm coloring some of these icings in yellow. I didn't want red because our elephant's ears are red and those candies are going to be red. This wrapper is already turquoise and we already have plenty of orange going on. So I thought the coloring these in yellow would help finish tying everything in as it is. Now, the oranges, don't get excited, folks. Just color them in any way you like. Nobody's going to notice any special detail on them. So now I'm going to color in the stand, and I want the stand to be white. And when I'm done with it, you're going to think that it looks gray. But after everything is completed on this card, it will look white. I'm using 2 colors on this. Just kidding, maybe 3. I'm starting with my C0 and I'm just adding where I want my shadows to be. I want the stand to look round, so I'm focusing around the edges there, and I'm just using the tip of my marker, and I'm trying to be careful how far I bring this out. And then I'm going to go in with my C3. I believe this is the lightest color. Yep, I only use 2. And I'm blending that out, and I'm calling it a day. Okay, so I'm coloring in my balloons. All of my balloons are going to be colored the same way, just in different colors. So I'm showing you this one, and I've got to be honest, I really loathe coloring balloons. I love balloons on a card. I just don't like coloring them in. That's just me personally, and this card wouldn't have been the same without them, so I pulled up my big girl britches and I did them anyways. I suppose that they look just fine. They're just not one of my favorite things to do. Okay, so now that we're done with our balloons, I'm going to get my EK Success journaling pen and I'm going to draw the threads onto our jar. Now the top of that jar looks kind of iffy. My lines are not perfect, and that's fine. Again, nobody's going to notice if everything isn't exact or the way they think it should look. I promise you, folks are just going to be like, wow, you made this, and that's all we're going for. It's just fine. So I'm just drawing straight lines, but I'm staggering the lines, and then I'm also making sure that I'm varying the lengths. And then the other important thing to keep in mind is you want some of those that are right up against your edges, because we're creating the illusion that this is round, and we could put a round lid on it. Now I'm just extending my lollipop sticks because I want those to look like they actually go down inside the jar. And then once I'm done with those, I'm just going to go reinforce the lines that I've already drawn in. I'm happy with how this looks, so I just want to make sure that my lines look a little bit cleaner. Again, this is not something that you necessarily need to do. This is a personal preference for me, but you could totally move on from there. If you're at all nervous when you start drawing those lines in, by all means use a pencil. Make sure that you like what you have, and then you can go back in with your pen. Just make sure that whatever pen you're using is Copic friendly, because we're going to be Copic coloring over the top of this later, and we don't want our ink to smear. Okay, at this point, I'm looking at my elephant that's on top of that jar, and not only do I realize that I missed his legs that are hanging down there the first time I colored him, but also I realize that I really need to reinforce the shadows on him, because these candies are going to be really dark. We need him to look like he has a lot more depth and dimension without making him look too dark. So I'm just going in and reinforcing those shadows a little bit more before I start working on the candies. Now, the candies are going to be fun to watch because y'all get to see what it's like when your red marker bleeds out on your card panel, and you'll actually see me have a moment where I freak out a little bit, and then I'm like, how am I going to fix this? But it's okay because it worked out, and again, we have a lot going on those panels, so people are only going to notice so much, and I did manage to save it. The first thing I'm doing is just going over all of the candies with my lightest color. This is the R20, and by the way, I will have all of the Copic colors listed in the YouTube description below, as well as links for them over on my blog if you're interested in what specific colors I used today. And I'm just making sure that I have everything filled in. I want a first initial coat for no other reason than it helps my eye focus better on all of those individual little candies. It helps separate them from my little elephant and the cupcake wrappers, so I can visually see what I'm doing better. Now I'm taking my R59, this is going to be my shadow color, and this is also going to be the color that's going to bleed out underneath our jar here in a moment or two, and I'm just going around the elephant right now. I want this elephant to look like he is outside of the jar, so I really need to enforce those shadows, and we're going to reinforce them even further when we start coloring in the jar. But if you don't give him a shadow behind him, almost his whole body, he's going to look like he's sitting inside the jar, and we definitely don't want that. With that R59, I'm just focusing on the lower half of the jar. Everything that is sitting back behind those two cupcakes that are in the front are going to get the R59. As we go towards the top, I will use my next lightest color before the R59. Now I'm separating out each of those candies. Again, I'm just focusing on the lower half of the jar because this would actually be your darkest area. And I'm trying to go as light as I possibly can, just using the tip of my marker. However, my first indication that something was going to go down here was I'm just using the tip, but as my marker touches the paper, it spreads out, the ink spreads out more than what it should. So you'd think I would have had a clue that something was going to go wrong, but I just kept forging on, hoping that nothing bad was going to happen. And unfortunately, it does. So I'm going through the bottom of the jar, and look at that right there. And I'm like, what? So here's how you deal with this, boys and girls. Let it dry. Do not touch it. Do not collect $200 and do not pass go. Let it dry. Move on. Then once it dries, take your colorless blender and push it back in just like that. Don't keep working at it. Just do it a little bit. Again, let it dry, move on to something else, and you just keep going back and working on it until it disappears. That's the best that you can do. I promise eventually it'll go away or it will lighten up, but just be patient. And I'm so sorry, folks. We blew through those lollipop wrappers while I was trying to explain to you how to clean up that mess. They're really easy. Anything you want to go further in the back, you color in with your darkest color. Anything you want to bring to the front and make look more round, you use your lightest color. Those are actually really easy and quick to do. Now we can afford some brown on our card panel, and I like chocolate, so I thought I'd make our cupcakes look like they're chocolate cupcakes. Again, this is super duper easy. I'm just reinforcing the shadows with my darkest color and working my way back out to my lightest, so those also look round. And now we're going to color in our jar. We need to have some color on our jar because it needs to look three-dimensional. So I'm using my cool grays again, because we have the red with in the candies. It won't blend into our elephant. It will just make it look more round. And I'm concentrating on the threads and the side of the jar. But when I do the sides, I make sure that I don't go all the way to the edge, because we need a little bit of reflection there. And then we're going to reinforce that some more when we finish off our card here pretty soon. Okay, so we are on the downhill slide here. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ground my images, and I want them to look like they're on a tabletop or a countertop. I started a little bit higher on this daisy, and then I decided that was a little bit too high, so I'm going to go a little bit lower. That's fine. We can clean that up with the colorless blender later. The only thing to note here is you want to make sure that these look symmetrical. So however high up you go on one side, you need to make sure that you go up at the same height on the other. Otherwise, it's going to throw the perspective off. It'll look like you're looking at this scene at a diagonal, and you don't want that. It'll look funny. I'm making sure to also stretch out the shadow on our elephant, because that's going to help reinforce that he is setting in front of the jar as opposed to inside the jar. And then I'm just working from lightest to darkest to lightest, and I'm making sure that I blend that out. And I do believe that I actually go back over this the final time with a C00. That'll help really make everything smooth out more and blend out, and then the lines don't look so harsh. Actually, that's not true. I actually go over this one final time with my colorless blender and blend everything out. You could skip that and just stop with a C00 and be just fine. I just thought I needed to take it a step further, but it was probably unnecessary. But no worries, we now have our card panel stamped and colored in, and now we are going to start moving on to getting this finished up. Now, you could take this card panel and you could put it on a card base right now, and you would be good to go. In fact, you may have noticed on my plan that I actually did have a sentiment stamped on it, but the more I looked at it, the more I realized that I really just wanted to make my own background. And you don't have to do that. There are so many other options that would make it so much easier than what I'm going to show you today. You could use stencils, you could use background stamps, you could just mask everything off and do a simple ink blended background. You could take solid image stamps and stamp those over a little bit of ink blending. There's so many different options. But I really enjoy making my own backgrounds. I really like the freedom of it. I really like working those colors in together, and these W+9 inks are perfect for this. So I have my counter masked off because I don't want to do any ink blending there, and I'm using W+9 Wild Mango ink with a Ranger mini ink blending tool, and I'm just putting a light layer of this color on there. We're going to go over it again. And we're going to go over it again while it's still wet, and that's important because these inks, while they're wet, they will continue to blend together, and that's perfect. We want that, but we do want a base color, and then we want to go a little bit darker, and we're going to make our own diagonal lines. And to do that, I'm going to take 2-inch wide Post-it labeling tape and cut that in half so I have 2 strips. Now, here's a little secret, folks. This is actually the second time I've made this card. That's actually how easy this is to make, that I am willing to go through this whole process, not just once, but twice. It's actually super duper easy. Anyway, the first time I made the card, I had a really hard time keeping track of where my masking needed to go. So I learned my lesson, and this time I actually drew out those little hash marks on my grid pad, and it worked out so much better. I'm using Sweet Nectar ink, and I'm blending in from the sides of the masking, and I'm leaving leaving the inside of each diagonal line a little bit lighter. And because I want those to have a little bit of dimension as well. It's not going to be a ton. It's not going to be super noticeable, but it's still enough that you get the idea. You get a little bit of detail. You also get to see the back of my head, but that's totally cool. So now I'm just going the opposite direction, and I need to make sure that I mask off that other diagonal line, because if we go over it again, it's going to be much too dark and it won't look right. Here's a closer look at how those meet up. And also this background really helps all of those images in front pop out a lot more. So now we're going to really get down to finishing this off. And one of the things that you can do that will really help any card look more complete is by finishing off your shadows. So we have all of the shadows on the bottom part. So everything that's sitting on that counter, it has its own shadows. Well, everything above that counter is also going to have shadows. So we're just going to add those in there. It's the same exact thing as I did on the counter. I'm just doing everything on top. My light source is going to be the top right, because why not? You could do the top left and that would be fine too. You could have a center light source and that would be fine. But I'm going from lightest to darkest back out to my lightest, but you need to be careful when you Copic color over ink blending, because your lighter colors, especially with W+9 inks, those will start pushing those inks away. And in some cases, I got a little overzealous there, and that's exactly what happened. So I'm taking Copic markers that match the colors in my background, and I'm just helping fill those in just a little bit. And look at that. It's just such a big difference. Everything looks more cohesive, and everything looks more three-dimensional. And that's exactly what you want. So the next thing that we're going to look at when we finish this off is adding in those finer details. So because I didn't put a lot of effort into my oranges, I'm taking a Copic Spica pen, and I'm just, this is a glitter pen, and I'm just filling in where those seeds would be. Those help those stand out a little bit more, plus it's cute, so why not? No card is complete without glitter, so today we're using a Spectrum Noir clear overlay pen, and we're just adding it to most of the highlights throughout the card. I like to focus glitter on just the highlights because I think it adds just a little bit more pop. It's just a little bit more fun. You could put it on anything you like, but I really prefer just keeping it to the highlights. The next thing I'm bringing in here is the Sakura Glaze Pen. This is the clear, and I love this thing. I use it all the time. I love that it adds just a little bit of oomph to your card. It just adds that little bit of detail, and it certainly doesn't add any weight to your card either, which is even better, especially if you're mailing these out. Plus, because it's a pen, it's easy to use, and it doesn't take up a lot of space in your stash. I thought about using the Sakura white souffle pen, and then I changed my mind and went with the Uniball Signo white gel pen. And I'm just adding this to a few highlights on the card. I'm not getting super excited with it. I did want to reinforce those highlights on my jar, so I did make sure to go just inside the edges on both, so it makes it look like the jar has a reflection on it. Now I'm going back in with that Sakura Clear Glaze pen, and I'm going over these stars. Again, that because it's a pen, it is so fine, I can do that with this. And it helps those stars stand out a little bit more. And then after I got done with these, I decided that I wanted those little sticks that are holding up those banners to have a little bit of dimensions to them as well. So maybe make them look a little bit more plastic, because I couldn't do a whole lot of coloring. They were too itty bitty to make them look super detailed. So this really helped finish that off. Now I'm going to bring in my Sakura Glaze pen in black, and I'm going to reinforce the little eyes on my elephants. Now the trick with these pens is if you want to get it like a perfect dot, you just hold it straight up and down and press down on it just a tiny bit. Sometimes I hold it there a little bit longer than what I should, and things get a little bit larger than what's necessary, but it generally works out well. Once you use it a couple times, you kind of get used to it, and look at that. Their eyes just really help or start to pop off the page there. Okay, at this point, you could really call it good here, ladies and gents. Absolutely not necessary to continue any further. I just decided that I wanted my little elephants to have sparkly ears because all elephants should have sparkly ears. And then also I was looking at those oranges and I felt like they hadn't gotten enough attention, so I decided to go back over those. But again, it's not necessary. So I'm just going to add those last minor details, and then I really am going to call it good with this card. I hope to have all 3 of these videos edited together in its entirety over the next couple of days. I'm going to be honest, it is going to be so long. I'm probably looking at a good 45 minutes worth of video. If you're interested in that, that is great. If not, feel free to watch each part separately. I completely understand. Okay, all that's left to do on this card is to put our card panel on our card base, and then we are done. Wow, what an accomplishment. Anyone that has followed along with this series and has made a card or made a scene using any of these tips and tricks, I would love to see it. I will have a link to my Facebook page down in the description below, as well as over on my blog. Please do share it with me. I want to see what you made. Creativity is one of the best things that you can do with your brain, and I love it when people share that with me. So I'm adding adhesive to the back of my card panel. This adhesive has been discontinued, but I will have links to alternatives down in the description below, as well as over on my blog. But you are welcome to use any adhesive that you like. I have my Nina Solar White cardstock cut down to 8 by 9 inches, and I have scored it at 4 inches. I just reinforced that fold with my bone folder. Now I'm carefully lining my panel on top of my card base. I want to make sure that I have this nice and straight. I'm sorry you can't see all of it, but I needed to get my head over it to make sure I did get it on straight. I've ruined many a card by not getting my card panel on there straight, and it's always a bummer. Okay, so the last thing I'm actually going to share with you is I don't always put sentiments on the front of my card. I don't think that they're always necessary. I really like my images to speak for themselves, and I don't think that sentiments necessarily always go with that. And also, if I have to take the time to struggle to figure out where I want that sentiment, then it's just not worth it to me. I'll put it on the inside, and that's fine. I'm using W+9 black dye ink to stamp my sentiment. This dye ink is brilliant for sentiments. It is crisp, it is black, it almost always stamps perfect the first time, and I really enjoy using it. I use it frequently for sentiments inside my cards. And look at this, it's perfect the first time. I don't even have to worry about restamping it, and I didn't use a stamping tool. So this is where we started, and this is where we finished. That's it. It was a little bit of time and a little bit of patience and some masking, and look at all the different layouts I came up with. I love to think outside of the box. I love to put things together that you normally wouldn't think of, and masking can create this whole other realm of possibilities in card making, so please don't shy away from that. That's it. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, as well as head over to my blog for more details and links. Thanks so much for stopping by. Until next time.